Welcome back to our final painting session with the companions piece, the gnome and the little owl friend. I have already oiled the painting in using a mixture of walnut oil and liquid. That liquid should help create a faster drying time so that I also will be able to paint on it in front of each of you during our final Zoom session. You will notice there are some white specks showing up in this particular painting at this point. While I was oiling the painting in, I also was checking for any large pieces of paint, anything that was disturbing to me visually or surface tension wise. And so what I did is very carefully, as I showed you in the last video, would scratch out some of those pieces, flake them off with my sharpened palette knife. And I will make those corrections today. What you see me doing right now is with a mixture of transparent oxide red and ultramarine blue, I'm creating a really nice dark to glaze over. And this material is mixed in with my liquid and walnut oil so that it can extend well. It's got very thin, transparent darkening. And I'm just darkening everywhere I think it needs to tie the shadows together. I've darkened the transitions of the legs, many occlusion shadows underneath aspects of things where the shadows would be their darkest. Under my leaves, as you can see, and in different places, just to create more of a realistic light source. I've always had a chance to step back, take a look at this. One of the things I do when I am watching my painting, looking at my painting, observing it from just to give it some objective aspects, are viewing the painting in low light. It really reduces the quality of the values and harmonizes the values in a way that allows me to see when things need to be reworked. What I'm also doing here is creating that overcast glow where the light from our lantern might spill over. So I am working on places that I think that might catch some of that light from the overspill. On the leaves themselves, I'll do some rocks here later as well. I'm using a mixture of yellow ochre, a Indian yellow, a white, so it's a fairly transparent color, allows my painting to come through. And then if I need to, occasionally I'll add some cadmium yellow medium if I feel it needs some more opacity to it. But I'm really tinting, I'm hinting at that yellow overspill of color, warming things gradually. Just being very selective about what I pick up. This is mostly intuition, just giving it some thought as to where the light patterns might fall. I want to create some visual interest as well. This is part of the area that I will probably darken with an ultramarine blue or a phthalo blue in our final Zoom meeting, just so you guys can see what I'm talking about, bringing a kind of a continuity, a tying together with color and with value to harmonize the painting in places. You can see also the beard at the upper part of the video. I believe I'm going to lighten that whole area up a little as well. Once the painting is dry, as you see it is here, it makes it so much easier to come and make these adjustments. It's up or down, literally using almost a thin translucent quality to the paint. I'm sorry you can't see what I'm painting on right now, which is probably part of the face or the beard, but really just trying to pull up highlights that are being caught by the lamp. When we're able to move up to the next portion of the demonstration, you'll see where I've also highlighted the beard, the flakes around the edge of his beard, and I will put a lot more time in on the hat and the owl. We've moved our camera, moved up to the upper portion of the painting. The glow is working really well from our work last week on the lantern. It needs some adjustments, and I think especially the adjustment on where the light is hitting on our little friend, the owl. I have washed in using a transparent oxide red with just a little hint of cadmium yellow medium, and very lightly warmed over the areas that I think I want to paint into. It has been oiled into, so the surface itself, the drag from the brush is very light, and all my touches are very sensitive and very delicate. This doesn't take a lot of work. Again, I'm working by my intuition. I'm kind of over-guessing and second-guessing where I think the light might be. And at the same time, just wanted him to have a little more prominence. I didn't want him to get lost in the shadows. So just trying to guess using my light logic much of what I try to teach the students, knowing that light comes from a straight line from the light source, and just imagining it flowing through between our gnome and his staff, through the area, that air, and landing on the little owl himself, and what parts of the owl would be catching the light. This is much easier after years and years and years and years and years of painting from observation, observing light patterns as they flow on objects, understanding how light logic works, the fall off. Very much like light creates shadows, you'll have occlusion shadows into the darkest part. You have the core shadow. Knowing what section is caught by our direct light source and what part of the light, which we are calling the secondary or atmospheric light source, also sometimes known as fill, is illuminating the overall general light of our owl and our scene. Working from dark to light, I'm using that dark warm of the transparent oxide red and just building up the highlight with adding yellow, not with adding white yet. I'm adding, to bring up the value, I'm adding yellow. And then only in areas where the subject matter, the rings around the owl's eyes, where they would be white if we were looking at them in local color, will I actually bring white into my transparent oxide red, or excuse me, my cadmium yellow medium to make it look more. Now, one of the things you have to be very careful here. If our light source is our light source, what's the rule? Nothing can be brighter, nothing can be lighter than the light source. So the highlights on the owl can't be lighter than our light source. They might reflect the light source almost directly, but even then, distance, the distance away from the light source, there would be some fall off. One of the things that I'll probably save for the very end tomorrow in our Zoom painting is bringing up the light source, bringing up the whites in the lantern itself, just a few adjustments to add nothing more than interest in making sure that nothing seems untoward or out of sorts. At this stage of the painting, I'm not even looking at reference anymore. I'm just very carefully making selections based on what my feel, what my thoughts would probably have to do. Really trying to think logically at how the light would strike the surface and subject of this area. The feathers, the softness of the feathers, how they might shine on the hardness of his beak or the glassiness of the eyeballs. And that's really what I'm working on more than anything else here. Just trying to imagine the softness of the feathers and how those would reflect light, much more diffused light, very few hard edges at all. But along the tips of those feathers around his eye, I'm trying to give the illusion that these feathers have tips to them, that they have edges. Now you're going to see me start to work in some of the atmospheric light and work through that part of the owl and our gnome himself, giving a little more thought to the general overall light source that's illuminating the scene, this kind of a darkness or a moonlit night, so to speak. I've mixed up on my palette a mixture of ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and lead white or zinc white. I don't want to use a titanium white now. I want the color to maintain as much of its color intensity, its chroma as possible. It's fairly dark in the value scheme of things. Again, very light touch, very translucent, almost a transparent effect, just so I can tickle this lighter approach where this general overall blue light would be lighting the subject matter of our scene. And then from here, I'll continue to work from dark to light, thinking this general overall overhead light, maybe the light coming through the dappled limbs of the trees in the forest, and just trying to imagine what it would look like as a soft box, almost a very general I don't know what we should think of a general overview of light, as if it were coming from a skylight, so to speak, in a studio. That means it'll have a very soft effect. There'll be very few hard edges to the shadows, no cast edges for sure. And again, without reference, just trying to imagine how that light would affect these turning edges of the soft feathers, the form and the roundest forms of our little owl friend here. Here I am stepping up those values a bit after just taking a little time to observe what I've painted so far to see if there are any other adjustments that I might need to make. I'm bringing those values, especially those turning edges that are going back to catch a little of that rim light that we might be seeing indicated from the light coming through the forest behind us. At this point, I'm not even trying to be super realistic. I'm trying to create illusion. But I want it to also fit within the space that I've created. And this is part of what's going on to do that. Now I want to harmonize the painting, these dimensional objects, these design elements that I put into this painting. I want to tie them together so that that blue value has much the same blue value. They look like they are connected, and that's why I'm doing it this way with the same color scheme and the same light source. I'll continue to make adjustments back and forth, up and down. As I say in my painting classes, warmer, cooler, brighter, darker, it's bluish, it's orangish. I make these little subtle adjustments back and forth. A little indication of rim light there. After observing and creating this blue glow, I think I need to add a little bit more of that overall generalized night light, that blue light. I'm going to bring down the core shadow of the red hat that I've created. I'm not going to eliminate it. I'm going to bring it down as if the light is having more of an effect, especially the higher we are, where the lamp's light has fallen off considerably. And I don't want that turning edge. It's too hard of a turning edge. It almost looks like it's a slight crease. So I'm going to soften that transition from the cool light to the warm light by softening that transition ever so slightly, bringing it all the way around. It will give much more of a felt quality to the hat itself, and at the same time will allow me to, I think, take that contrast down just a bit on the red above his head or above the skin of his head. I think that needs to come down a little bit more. I think the value is a little too low. I'm going to bring the value up, but at the same time I'm going to be sensitive to the temperature change from the overspill of the warm light on one side to the very casual gradation to the cool light. And you can see how all those little adjustments lead to another adjustment. Changing the value on the skin of our gnome, bringing it up ever so slightly, adjusting it to keep it cool. There's a little transition there where the cheek catching the light is just ever so gradually starting to turn and change over to the cheek itself. I still want the local color of the cheek to feel warm, but now it's being affected by the cool light itself. So this is going to have a very subtle approach. This glazing technique is one of the easiest ways to make those super subtle transitions on beautiful women, on soft babies, or on nice little cherub-cheeked gnomes, as we see here as well. That means that furrow in his brow, okay, that was looking a little too harsh. That transition was looking a little too harsh. So I'm going to bring that value up ever so slightly in a nuanced way with that blue or purplish light source on his skin, and just fight that little transition. If you could notice that transition right there on his forehead, how subtle. When you squint, you can tell that the value is almost exactly the same. One side looks warmer and one side looks cooler, and making that nice subtle transition between the two, keeping the values. Now I'm just bringing back some of the warm values on that side of the cheek, ever so slightly, just stepping them up very carefully to catch a little reflection on the cheeks itself. Now bringing that pink, I've cooled it down with pink, doing that all over, ever so subtly. And now modeling the cheeks again to keep them rosy, but affected by the cool blue light, making that little transition. It's all these subtle little changes. As we call this the finishing part, it's always one of the hardest parts, but it's the part that really makes the magic happen. When you can see these little subtle transitions.